Welcome to another edition of the Business and Personal Podcast, where we bring you closer to the people that you do business with. And today we have a great guest, Michael Burke, the Executive Director of the Michigan Problem Gambling Association. A lot of you have probably seen all these ads for gambling all over the place now since it's become legal in Michigan. And Michael has been involved in this organization for more than 20 years. So he recognized it as a problem even before it became legal in Michigan. So now it's, draws even more attention. So we're excited to talk to him to kind of talk about how this is a good thing for our state, but also the parameters that you should set for yourself. So first of all, Michael, thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, Ryan. Thank you for having me on. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I was from Howell, Michigan, lived there most of my life. I'm a recovering alcoholic of 44, 45 years. I lived in this perfect little community. I was an attorney practicing law. I have my wife, Jane, has since passed away a few years ago, but I have two granddaughters from my two daughters. Back then, I had an absolutely perfect life, but unfortunately, I got into gambling, and it turned my whole life upside down. And I thought of one way to introduce it, to give you an idea, is not what I have to say, but what one of my victims had to say about me. At the time of sentencing in Michigan, the victims have a right to come in and give their impact statements, and this is one of them. I've known Mike and his family for 15 years. Our daughters are good friends. We have common friends in this courtroom right now, and it pains me. I'm sure his family feels the same devastation my family has felt. But when I look at Mike, I don't see him as a victim of gambling addiction. I see him as a cold, calculating criminal. Now, that was just one of 15 people who came in that day in Livingston County to make their statement. And as a result of what I had done, I ended up going to prison for 3 years at Jackson Prison, losing my license to practice law. Now, I want everyone to understand, this is from a person who grew up in a family of attorneys. My grandfather was an attorney. My father was an attorney. My father-in-law was an attorney. I loved the practice of law. But unfortunately, I got involved in gambling after I'd gotten straightened out from the drinking. And it devastated me, it devastated my family, and it devastated my community.
Wow, Michael, in all our preparation for podcasts, you hadn't even shared that story with me. That should grab people's attention, that you're not just saying this for the heck of it. You've lived through this and you don't want anybody else to live through it. So that's very powerful. So tell me about we're going to talk about what's going on here in Michigan in a little bit and what you're hoping to see down the road. But before we get into that, tell me about the Michigan Association for Problem Gambling, what it's all about.
Okay. This is an advocacy organization. Our board of directors are all volunteers. We get absolutely no financial assistance from the state of Michigan. We appear before the legislature to argue things that we feel would be beneficial to gamblers. It's a very important function that we have in doing that, and we've worked well with them. Unfortunately, a little bit, we have a hard time working with the state of Michigan, but that's all right. We are supported financially primarily by the industry and by other organizations like that. And they support us through their yearly contributions.
What have you seen here just in the recent times with gambling? Like I said, being legal here in Michigan now, and it's everywhere. You can't drive anywhere without seeing a billboard. You can't turn a TV on without seeing an ad. You can't turn a radio on without hearing an ad. Can't look at your phone without seeing an ad. I mean, it is everywhere, and they make it unbelievably easy. Like, hey, if your team hits a 3-pointer today, you can win a bunch of money. Like, pretty easy hook to get people into this. What are you seeing already in the early returns with gambling being legal in Michigan?
Exactly what the National Council suggested would happen. I've been on the National Council of Problem Gambling out of Washington, D.C., a board member for about 5 years now. And they saw this coming down the road. I think it's very important that I explain now that neither the National Council nor any of the state affiliates, which Michigan is one, take a position for or against gambling. We leave that up to the individual to work that out. But what we just try and do is give information. But what we also seek when something like this occurs, and when you say it was big, it was huge in Michigan. I will tell you that 10 days prior to that being enacted into law, I was receiving phone calls from media outlets across the state and across the country, wondering what we thought was going to happen. And that is exactly what has happened. Millions of people have flocked. And you're right about the ads. It was ads like I have never seen in my lifetime for anything. But they want to make their footprint in Michigan, and that's what they're doing. Now, let me tell you what we as an organization are looking for. We want to work with these people because, you see, we know one thing going into this, that down the road, and it's always a few years down the road that it catches up, there's going to be a point in time where you're going to see a real increase in the number of compulsive gamblers in this state. And what we are hoping for is that these organizations will take a small amount of their money and work with us in establishing an inpatient treatment center. We do not have that in Michigan at this point in time. The state has suggested that they are working on it. But I must say they've been working on it for over 10 years that I'm aware of, and we still don't have it. Let me give you a real quick idea of how this would work. And the best example I can use is a facility called CORE, capital C, capital O, capital R, capital E, in Shreveport, Louisiana. And back around 2000, when they had the boats, the river boats coming in to set up their gambling, an individual by the name of Reese Middleton went to the state government and he told them that if they're going to do this, that they know in advance that a certain percentage of their people, a very small percentage, but a very large number, were going to be impacted. And so what he suggested is what we should do is set up a treatment center in advance of this occurring. And we would have a 30-day inpatient program for any compulsive gambler in the state of Louisiana who wanted it. And here's the catcher. It would be absolutely free. Now, let me tell you why that's important. Gamblers will gamble till their last token is gone. They will call the helpline under one or two circumstances. Number one, they're out of money and they don't know where to get any more money. Or number two, a spouse or another family member or friend is standing there with a gun up to their head, telling them if they don't call the helpline, they're going to shoot them. Gamblers do not go to treatment willingly. 1 in 10 compulsive gamblers will actually get treatment. So what our organization is hoping for, and I'm working with people in Illinois right now, people in Indiana, to see if we can't come up with a facility down near the St. Joseph border where we could treat people from all 3 states and make it completely free to them. And that's what we're working on right now. We'd be more than happy to work with the state. We wish that they'd invite us in. But to this point in time, that hasn't happened.
So what sort of treatments do you envision? What treatments work to help people get back on the right track?
The program down in Louisiana, CORE, is a perfect example of that. It's very much like a substance abuse treatment center, much like the one that I went through 44 years ago at Brighton Hospital in Brighton, Michigan. It's a 30-day program, a lot of education, a lot of group therapy, a lot of AA, so that when you come out of that facility, at least now you have the power to make a decision every morning when you wake up. You can decide whether I'm going to drink today or not drink today. Before going through Brighton Hospital, I didn't have that ability. I would drink every day. The gambling can work the very same way, and that's the way it works. I've been to Louisiana to talk 3 times. I speak all over the country. And it's just wonderful. It's amazing. And for the state of Michigan not to have an inpatient program in the year 2021, when they've had one in Louisiana for 20 years, just doesn't make any sense. I want to finish that by adding the money is already there for it. It's not going to be any tax dollars. It's not coming out of anybody's pocket. That money is paid by the industry, by the casinos, by the lottery, by the horse racing people, by the people who gamble. It's bringing in another $1 million now because of all of the new forms of gambling that we're having. There's one thing we know for sure: the increase in gambling, and there's going to be one hell of an increase in gambling, is going to cause much devastation for a small percentage of people in the state of Michigan, but a very large number.
And I want to make sure that our listeners are clear on this, that we're not against gambling. We think it can be a good thing for the state, and even the companies that are running, running these gambling sites, they're willing to work as well to make things better.
They absolutely are. They're right out there in front. We have people from the industry on our board. They want, they don't want to destroy people's lives. That's not what it's about. And I'm not a shill for the casinos, but I've seen the good work that they do. And you know what? They never complain. They never complain. These are their clients, if you will, and they don't want to see them do some of the things that we read about in the newspaper. They don't want another Michael Burke out there who takes other people's money to feed his gambling addiction. They'd like me to be able to come in and enjoy myself as a regular customer, set a limit, and have fun, have a dinner. They don't want to see families destroyed and lives destroyed, but that's what's happening. So what we have to do is get to these people sooner and get them into treatment. I'll tell you what the state of Michigan offers for treatment right now. They will give an individual 10 or 12 weeks of therapy. Now, that's once a week for 1 hour. And I'm telling you, that is it. They're done after that. Now, these are people who, like Mike Burke, have gambled for years and years and years. And at some point in time, crossed the line from regular fun gambling into this really bad, sick, devastation gambling. We've got to be able to get those people before they get there. And we could do it. We could. There are many ways of finding gamblers. Number one, substance abuse treatment centers. Addiction is addiction is addiction. The majority of gamblers I've met in the last 15 years, and that is thousands of gamblers, come from a substance abuse background. So we should start educating in the AA community, make them aware of things to watch out for. We should start educating and running classes in the substance abuse treatment centers. I did that for 5 years. And you know what I found? I screened the patients after my presentation. 16% of the patients at Brighton Hospital during that 15 years had a co-occurring gambling problem. They're there. We can find them, but we're going to need the support to do that.
And when you mentioned how much time is currently offered for treatment, how much do you think is really required to get somebody better? I'm sure it varies a little bit from person to person, but in general, how much time does it take?
You know, I love 30 days. I saw it work at Brighton Hospital when I went through there. I still have friends from there. I've seen it work at CORE. They have something like a 78% rate. I will tell you, the majority of gamblers I've worked with relapse and relapse and relapse because nobody's ever taken them out of it. The chains of gambling addiction are too weak to be felt until they're too strong to be broken. Those are the ones who are coming for treatment. We've got to get them back in that earlier stage.
Very, very good information right there. Now, when you look at it, what would you say would be good parameters for someone to put on themselves? Someone that maybe has never gambled before, that is high risk to become addicted with these new laws. What's a starting point of, hey, here's your limit, don't go beyond that?
Well, I think the most important thing for those people, because you see, their limits are different. The amount of money gambled is totally irrelevant. It's when they start getting in trouble because of it. And here's how they can run a check on themselves. Set a limit when you go into the casino. And then give yourself a screen. It's called a lie bet screen. And this is so powerful, it works. You must ask yourself, number one, did I bet more money than I planned to or stay longer than I planned to when I came to the casino tonight? And number two, did I lie about it? The foundation of every addiction is built upon lies. Everyone. The most important thing I'm going to tell you on this today is the foundation of every addiction is built upon lies.
Yes, I think accountability is huge, right?
Yeah. And if they answer yes to one or two of those questions, get into treatment. If not, families, be aware. The problem, the hard part about catching a gambler, it's an age-old saying in Gamblers Anonymous: you can't smell a deck of cards on a gambler. You know, You don't know, and the people who will be watching this don't know, if I was out at the casino for 6 hours last night, it wouldn't show up. You know, if I'd been drinking for 6 hours, I'm going to tell you, you would know it.
Right.
I'd be slurring my words. I'd be unable to carry through the thought. We know what the difference is. So for the gambler, the really important part is the family or the significant other to keep an eye on them. You see somebody who starts going to the casino more and more and more, you've got to talk to that spouse about it. Money comes up missing and your gambler tells them, well, I needed it to pay off a debt. Get that person into treatment. Get them into therapy. Do it immediately. It's not going to get better. Today, in the life of a gambler, is as good as it's ever going to get. It's only going to get worse from this point on. And these people think they can save their family members. One thing you never do, ever, is a bailout. And that's when somebody comes to you and say, oh, I really need money. I've gotten in a little bit of trouble. We'll never tell you what it is. Gotten in a little bit of trouble. I'll pay you back in a month. Who goes to people and borrows money? Nobody in my lifetime ever came to me and asked me for money. I mean, it's really unusual. A gambler will come ask you for money. A gambler will bounce checks at the casino. One of the most interesting figures I ever saw, 2 out of 3 compulsive gamblers will commit an illegal act to get money with which to gamble, or, and this is more significant, to take care of problems created by gambling. Now, that's what I had done. I had gambled after casino winds opened. I finally had a place within 60 miles of me, and that's the magic number. So it was less than an hour away from Howell. And I would go over there. And in the beginning, I set a limit of 2 to 3 hours with $300 a time. I made a lot of money as a lawyer. It was never about the money. But as I did that over and over and over, I started losing. The first stage of compulsive gambling is winning. And that makes sense. In the beginning, that's all you remember is the fun parts. The time that I was in Las Vegas with my 2 brothers early on before it was a problem, and I hit a $17,000 slot. I was waiting for them at lunch, just throwing them in. That is so indicative of somebody who's got to be aware of a future problem. And that's called the big win. But I would just gamble more and more and more. And then it got to the point where I found myself in a position I'd never been in my life. I was broke and I owed money. And you got to understand, I'm doing all of this. I'm going over there twice a week and doing this. Nobody knew it. Very easy for me to hide as a lawyer. I'd tell my secretary I was off to Detroit, I was off to Ann Arbor, or whatever. Sometimes I'd have those trips and I'd extend them by going over for a few hours. But then after 3 or 4 years, I was broke and I owed money. So I borrowed it from a client. And that's where the problem started, because it came obviously down the road where the client wanted their money back. And I didn't have it. And they were going to expose me. So what did I do? I went into my client's escrow account. Did I know better than that? Of course I did. I've been around lawyers since I was born. But I wasn't stealing the money. And remember, we gamblers are all the same. I was just going to borrow the money till I could pay it back. And that's what gamblers do, and that's how they get in trouble. So for God's sakes, if you get an indication that there's something going on, You see money missing out of accounts. Gambling despite consequences. Withdrawal. Gamblers go through withdrawal. They get just in cruddy moods. They go these highs and lows. You see difference in relationships. This person who used to treat you like the love of his or her life is now just angry at you all the time. You see these things happening. You know something's going on. Don't just say, well, he'll get through this. He'll get over this. Talk to the person. Keep the dialogue open. And if you find out that the word gambling comes up, get that person to a therapist. It's better than nothing in the beginning. The best thing would be is if we had the treatment center.
Absolutely. And you can just see where it's a spiral of events that piles on. You got the initial problem that can be resolved if you get out in front of it. But if you don't, then it spirals into so many other parts of your life.
Ryan, can I tell you one more thing? In the beginning, proximity is really a big issue for a gambler. They've done studies. The National Impact Study by Clinton showed that if you open a new casino and you open it within 50 to 60 miles of a gambler, that those problems will double for those gamblers who are predisposed to having a problem. We've gone from 50 to 60 miles. It was 58 miles to Windsor from Howell. We've gone from that 60 miles to 6 inches. I pick up my phone, I call in my bet. And it's a whole new set of gamblers. These kids today are not going to the casinos like we did.
Right.
They're doing it on their computers, they're doing it on the phones. And you talk about being able to hide it. And it's because of the stigma. In the beginning, they don't want people knowing what they're doing. In my beginning, when it wasn't hurting me financially, I certainly couldn't tell anybody that I'm losing. I was a blackjack player, that I'm losing $300 twice a week playing blackjack. They'd look at me and they'd say, "Are you out of your mind? Why would you do that?" And it wasn't the money. And for the non-gambler, I think that's the hardest thing to understand. It's the high. For the alcoholic, it certainly isn't the booze. I hated the taste of alcohol, but I loved the high that it gave me. And that's exactly the way gambling was. It took over my life. Dr. Rosenstein, in his definition of addiction, calls it, of gambling addiction, an uncontrollable urge to gamble. Think of that for yourself or a family member, somebody you really care about. Think about them being in a situation where they really can't stop. And they're not going to stop until a crime is charged, the spouse leaves them, they get fired from their job, suicide. Gambling is the number one addiction cause for suicide. Number one. 1 out of 5 gamblers will attempt suicide. I had a gun up to my head. And I had to tell my family this, and it's in my book. And it was the hardest thing I ever had to tell them. When I had the gun up to my head in my office late one night in September of 2000, it was the single greatest feeling I ever had in my life. I knew it was going to be over. I knew it was going to be done. Thank God I didn't do it. But that's it. And then comes, is there life after gambling? I get so many gamblers who ask me, my life is fantastic. My life before gambling was great. I had everything a man could ever want. And today, with my lovely little Social Security check, I've got everything that I want. I don't need any more than that. Life is good. But for an addict, when you're in an addiction, and it doesn't matter what it is, they will kill you. Gambling, though, is because of the stigma. That's what takes so many people down. I couldn't figure out how I could ever tell my family. How do you do that? You know, you've been married 25 years. You are a leader in the community, president of the Bar Association, highly thought of. Yeah. That's what, for a very small percentage of people, gambling can do.
Well, Michael, there's a lot of people happy that you decided to not pull that trigger, man, because you're doing so many great things right now. And a lot of people glad that you started this way back in 2000, because who knew 20 some years later, the need for what you do is even more than ever. I'm so glad we can get this information out there. I want to let people know a couple different ways that they can get involved. You know, first of all, anybody that thinks they have a problem, how can they help start to get treatment through you? And also, I know you're reliant a lot on donations. How can people contribute to your cause as well?
Number one, the gambling helpline for Michigan is 800-270-7117. My personal phone number is 517-672-6904. This is what I do today. Jane and I talked it over after I got home in 2004, and we decided that back then that I would spend the rest of my life working with gamblers, and I have, and it's been wonderful. The one thing I always like to tell people is that we made it through what I had done. The last 8 years before Jane passed away, she had glioblastoma, a tumor of the brain. But the last 8 years were the best 8 years of our 48-year marriage. We really got it worked out. And you can do that. And you can have a wonderful and a significant life again.
And also, if anybody's listening that maybe wants to donate to help your association continue to help others, are there opportunities for that as well?
Yes, they are, but I don't have the address of where it would be sent. Maybe I can get it for you and you can post it on there. See, we do everything Zoom now. And I know we have a bank account. We get financial help from the casinos, some. We're going to be looking for more because we're making a real push on this treatment center. We can buy, build, establish a treatment center in Michigan for under $500,000 a year. And that would be free to the individuals coming into the treatment center. I don't understand it, why we haven't done that yet. And it's got to be, I know there's been some talk about going together with another kind of treatment center, like a Brighton Hospital or something like that. That's not going to work. Each addiction should have its own treatment center where the like people are coming in. I go around the country speaking, and I tell alcoholics, whatever you do, don't gamble. And I tell gamblers at AA meetings, whatever you do, don't drink. And you know what? They both think I'm crazy. We have to set them up in their own little treatment centers. I'll say one more thing. Treatment for gamblers is relatively cheap, though. You don't need the medical like you do with the substance abuse.
Well, Michael, again, just awesome information. We look forward to seeing continued growth with your organization and hopefully able to help more people down the road. Thanks for your time.
Ryan, I thank you so much for what you're doing. There will be some people who will hear what we did today and their lives will be better because of it. So thank you.
Absolutely.